All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're tackling an absolutely crucial reading skill. I'm talking about how we can actually transform our middle school students from being just, basic word decoders into deep analytical thinkers. We're going to explore this fantastic framework from our source material that literally takes the guesswork out of reading comprehension. It's all about turning every single student into an active investigator of the text. So, here's the quick roadmap for our journey today. First up, the comprehension gap. Then, decoding the core concepts. After that, guided practice case studies, followed by defeating the final boss. And finally, mapping the ripple effect. Let's get to it. Starting things off with Section 1, the comprehension gap. It's a very real struggle in the classroom. Middle schoolers can often decode words out loud beautifully, right? But then when you ask them to explain the actual relationships between events, they just kind of miss the connections entirely. So what's the solution? Well, the source material captures it perfectly with this idea. Understanding cause and effect is like being a detective. Because reading, it isn't a passive activity. Students need to be on an active investigation to find the why they have to learn, to trace an event all the way back to its origin.
Moving right along to Section 2, decoding the core concepts.
Before we can just ask our student detectives to go out and solve these complex textual mysteries, we've got to arm them with the right academic theory. So first up is the cause. And the absolute crucial point to hammer home here is that the cause is always the starting point. It's the core reason why something happens. And hey, here is a massive tip you can share with your students. The cause happens first in time. Even if the author doesn't actually place it first in a sentence, we really have to train them to look for that literal chronological trigger. Now, if the cause is the trigger, then the effect is the outcome. It's simply the result, right? It's what happened because of that initial cause, the consequence. Think about it like this. If a student forgets to charge their tablet, well, that's the cause. But that tablet battery dying right in the middle of class, that's your effect. Here's where it gets fun. Authors actually leave these little breadcrumbs throughout the text, and we call these signal words. You want to visually arm your students with these clues. So for causes, tell them to highlight words like because, since, due to, or created by. And then for effects, they should be scanning the page for words like therefore, consequently, or as a result. Honestly, pre-teaching these words gives students a really tangible tool so they can spot these relationships almost instantly. Okay, Section 3, guided practice case studies. Let's see this in action. Now, theory is great and all, but we really need to see what this looks like on the ground. Take this snippet from a guided practice story in the source material about a student named Maya. It says, because she missed the bus, Maya had to wait in the office until her mom picked her up. It's a super simple, relatable little mini narrative. But if you look closely, it's just embedded with clues. The word because is sitting right there at the very front of the sentence, basically waving a giant flag at our readers. So, when you're working through something like this with your class, this is the exact question you want to pose to them. What is the chain of events in this passage? Asking it this way prompts students to move way beyond just hunting for a single answer. It forces them to track the actual logic of the story. You're asking them to trace relationships, not just, randomly locate one sentence. And just notice how one action inherently triggers the next in a literal step-by-step sequence. Step 1, Maya stayed behind to help a friend find a missing music folder. Well, that caused Step 2, she missed the bus. And missing the bus, that caused Step 3, she had to wait in the office. Which, of course, finally caused Step 4, she got home later than usual. When your students map it out exactly like this, the entire architecture of the narrative is totally revealed. All right, moving into Section 4, defeating the final boss. Injecting just a little bit of gamer culture here, the final boss is obviously the hardest part of the game, and in reading, that's definitely those complex standardized test questions. Tests love to disguise these concepts. They are rarely going to just plainly ask, what is the cause? So students really need to recognize variations like the direct why, questions like, why did the families move? Or maybe the result query, like, what was one consequence of this action? They want to even run into an if-then scenario. Honestly, just teaching them to recognize these formats is half the battle won right there. But oh man, the absolute ultimate challenge is the two-part text evidence question. We've all seen them. Part A asks the student to identify the cause or effect. That's their claim. Then Part B demands that they find the exact sentence that best supports their answer. That's their evidence. I like to think of this as a lock and key. You have to remind your students that if their evidence in Part B doesn't directly prove their claim in Part A, they need to back up and re-evaluate. Those two parts, they have to fit together flawlessly. Which brings us to our final section, number 5, mapping the ripple effect.
So we've mastered simple stories, and now it's time to escalate to macro events with multiple causes and effects. This is absolutely essential when you get into complex informational tests. Let's take this historical passage about the Dust Bowl from the source material. It sets the scene nicely. During the 1930s, a severe drought hit the Great Plains. But wait, it wasn't just the weather. For years prior, farmers had actually been overplowing the land. So you've got multiple things happening all at once to set up this really complex chain reaction.
And notice how a ripple effect actually plays out chronologically. Years prior, the initial cause was the overplowing. Combine that with the severe drought in the 1930s, the immediate effect of those two things, huge clouds of black dust. But then, that immediate effect essentially becomes a brand new cause, leading to a secondary effect, livestock suffocating, which ultimately creates the massive long-term effect, mass migration westward. When you can get a reader to visualize history logically like this, it truly changes everything.
Ultimately, I love how our source material reminds us of this one core truth. History and literature are just long chains of causes and effects. When you find the why, the what makes a lot more sense. When our students finally learn how to really trace these reasons and results, they aren't just becoming better at English language arts. They're actually becoming stronger, much more critical thinkers in literally every single subject across the board.
So, there you have it. You now have a full, ready-to-use framework. All you need to do is grab a text, have them pull out those signal words, and draw out a chain reaction map together. Which leaves me with just one question for you. Which reading passage are you going to map out with your student detectives tomorrow?